I think what was really interesting from my perspective when we were talking about this previously, the only book that I could think of on political management was Machiavelli's The Prince. So it had taken some time for the latest version to come out. But thank you very much for that. Plenty of food for thought there for us to reflect on when we get to the discussion later. But now I'm delighted to introduce advocate now, Chris Green, former People's Deputy, having served 2 terms from 2012 through to 2020 before deciding to take a break. And in his first term, I had the pleasure of working and serving for him on the Education Board, where I was his Chief Officer. And then in his second term, he was chair of the Scrutiny Management Committee, where he made public hearings far more regular and effective, as he was attempting to make government more accountable and transparent. So Chris, if I could invite you just to give your observations on Jennifer's analysis and recommendations based on your experience as a Guernsey State's Deputy.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you, Jennifer. Drawing on my experiences of being in the States in the last 8 years between 2012 and 2020, I certainly am of the view that both new and returning deputies would indeed benefit from a form of continuing professional development, and that this should be considered by the new states as soon as possible. I think there's probably 3 main reasons why I'm of that view. Firstly, as Jennifer has already alluded to, being in government and or parliament is fundamentally different from being in business or in the law or in any number of other professions. Certain business people have come into the States in the past thinking that government can be ran essentially as a business, as a chief executive perhaps might in a very formal business hierarchy, for example. But one simply, in that scenario, one simply has to tell others what to do. But in the States, as in politics more generally, but specifically in our states, which operates a committee system of government and consensus politics in the wider house, life is much more complicated than that simple kind of business hierarchy setup. Life is much more complicated, and you simply can't run it from the top. You can't run it in a kind of top-down mode. We certainly can't do that for too long before you start burning bridges and damaging relationships. In the States, you can't realistically achieve anything on your own, and teamwork is absolutely critical. Cooperation and collaboration skills are very much the name of the game. In order for our system of government to prosper, it needs members to have the appropriate skills to help make the consensus system fly. And I think those characteristics really are high emotional intelligence, social awareness, relationship management skills, empathy skills, and so on and so forth. Listening to others within the states really is absolutely essential, and it is a hugely underrated skill. And I think structured CPD can help foster, develop those sort of skills. But secondly, I think the idea of working within teams and with stakeholders more broadly in government is absolutely key and is often overlooked in my experience of the last 8 years. Again, in business, if an employee doesn't like the direction that a company is going in, or if you're a consumer and you don't like the customer service you're being provided with, you can always go elsewhere. But in government, the electorate, pressure groups, the third sector and other stakeholders, they can always criticize and will always criticize from the outside. So the key thing is, how do you get the public behind your flagship policies? That is an incredibly important thing, and you need appropriate and skilled engagement with those stakeholders to actually achieve the things that you want to achieve. For example, and it's perhaps a very recent example, a failure to properly engage with teachers, parents, students, etc., on the recent one school on 2 sites model, very much led directly or indirectly to the demise of that particular policy. The know-how to reach out, to speak to your stakeholders, and to communicate well is a vital skill, and we should not presume that that skill or that practice will always happen automatically. So again, structured CPD, I think, could help there too. And thirdly, we also need to ensure that we get the very best out of our politicians that we elect as a society. Our politicians certainly need to look after themselves to maximise their effectiveness. So a certain amount of resilience is absolutely key. It can be a very tough, draining, demanding, unrelenting job like few others. You are living in the public eye 24/7, 365 days a year, and no one actually currently gives support to politicians to enhance their mental health or well-being, or their physical health and well-being for that matter. But equally, those politicians, they need to have a certain baseline competence in a range of different skill sets. And there currently is no baseline kind of skills audit for new or returning deputies within the states, and I think that is actually required. CPD in a structured way could help deputies develop, refresh, or enhance the core skills that they need to do the job, or to do the job better. Whether it be media training, including social media training, because that's an absolute jungle out there on Facebook and on Twitter, or public speaking coaching, or IT skills, or corporate governance training, or indeed furthering the understanding of members of the code of conduct, or indeed of corporate parenting. There is a lot of scope there, I think, to brush up and to enhance the skills that members do need to do their job as best as possible. So in my view, CPD training for deputies really would add not only to help members preserve their own sanity when in office, but also to brush up on those really core skills. So in conclusion, I believe sincerely that we should really be doing as much as possible to make the most of the human capital that deputies as people represent, and to foster those skills and to develop those skills as far as is practicable, and not to take anything for granted in terms of capabilities and of capacity. We live in an increasingly complex island and an increasingly complex world where governance failures and data protection issues and all of these, a whole host of issues, I named just two in terms of governance and data protection, but there really are a whole host of issues. These things pop up and they can undermine the Guernsey public's faith, trust and confidence in its elected assembly. But it is arguably unfair, I think, to expect elected deputies to navigate this increasingly complex jungle without some recourse to regular and relevant training sessions that can actually build genuine confidence and brush up those abilities over time in a much more structured way. That's how I see it. There you have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that. And I think you make a number of really relevant points there. And in particular, just to expand on the issue about mental health and well-being for deputies, because that's often, I think, gets overlooked, and also for their families as well on the island, because we do very much live in a goldfish bowl, and there have been a number of previous deputies who have actually stood down because of the pressure that their families were going to come under. So I think the support mechanisms are really important there.